Living Waters presents On the Box.
Brad, I know you've been anxious to get to our first question.
Actually,
anxious.
There's some questions that are just, so many ways to answer it that it makes it hard to give one answer. But
Really?
Well, yeah, because, my thoughts are swimming on this because, there's a lot of ways to look at it. But go ahead. I don't want to.
Well, as the father of 3 daughters, you have
Four.
A brood
Four
of daughters as well, and
Four
a son.
daughters.
Yes. Thinking of my 3 daughters and thinking of this first question, my answer is simple.
Yeah.
So here's the question. Is kissing before marriage a sin?
Is kissing before marriage a sin?
If lust is not, all caps, involved. My dad said that you quote-unquote kill the blessings from God for the future wife and family you are going to have. Is it true? Thank you.
I feel like I'm about to have a sex talk with my children.
Don't look at me.
Well, theoretically speaking. Well, we're supposed to conduct ourselves in a way that's holy and honorable.
Yeah.
And, this is a measure by which we live and how we interact with those that are believers. When we're courting somebody, that doesn't make them our spouse yet. In fact, I would say you should treat that person as if they're not, because they may be somebody else's spouse someday. And I wouldn't want my wife to engage in any kind of way that wasn't holy and honorable with anyone that wasn't me. And thus, I wouldn't want the person courting the other person to treat what could be somebody else's future spouse in that same way. So I would say there are reasons why you shouldn't kiss before marriage. It's to say whether it's sin or not. He makes the point that if it's lust, not involved, well, I don't know how he can make that determination for the other person. He may be able to say for himself, which I think is probably doubtful.
I don't think he can.
But he can't make that guarantee for the other person for certain. And I think he's in danger, at the very least, of tempting the other person to fall into sin.
Now, you mentioned a word several times, and that is courting. I think that's a word that's foreign to many Christians, and certainly those outside the body of Christ. What do you mean by that?
Basketball.
Well, I think it's
it's more than basketball.
I think it's a relationship with the intention of marriage. That people try to use dating as if they're trying to find that person to marry. But I think when we engage in a relationship, it should be whether you would actually could see yourself as somebody that this would be someone you would marry. Yeah. Otherwise, I think you'd be wasting your time.
Dating, as it's most commonly practiced by Christians and non-Christians alike, is merely practice for divorce. Try someone on for size for a little while. When that person doesn't feel good anymore, you cast that person aside and you go on to another dating relationship. Mark, what do you think about this question?
Boy, somebody mentioned inside the chat room there's a good book by Joshua Harris, Boy Meets Girl.
Yeah, that is a good
I
book.
love Joshua Harris, and I haven't read that book, but I would imagine the book is going to be good based upon the author. So if you are needing more advice, I might suggest you heading up that way, even though I haven't read it yet. I think Brad makes an interesting point here, that you are potentially kissing somebody else's wife. Well, there's a good chance that this might become my wife. Well, let me ask you this. All right, so if you don't see anything wrong with kissing, would you be okay if your wife was kissing somebody else inside of a parked car, perhaps some other place? But there's no lust involved. They're just kissing. They're just playing tonsil hockey, right? So would that be okay at that point if your wife were to engage in that activity? I would say no, you would not be too hip or excited to do that unless you're some sort of a secular actor who doesn't care because you yourself are engaging in those acts. You need to be very, very careful. I remember I had a friend right before I went around the U.S. for about a month and a half before I had gotten married, and he was convinced his girlfriend had broken up with him right before we went on this trip. And he was convinced that this woman was going to be his wife. Well, now this girl, his ex-girlfriend, is dating our third roommate that we had. So our third best friend, our third amigo here, is now seeing his ex-girlfriend. And I remember going up to him and saying, hey, you need to be very careful, because my buddy is still convinced, our buddy is still convinced that that's going to be his future wife. Be very careful what you do. he goes, oh, no, she's mine. We're the ones that are going to be getting married. Well, needless to say, they didn't get married. But my friend, who I did go around the U.S. with, ended up getting back together with his ex-girlfriend, and they did get married, and they have like 5 beautiful kids now to this day. You need to be very careful what happens. 1 Corinthians 7 says, it is good for a man not to touch a woman. We need to be very careful in what we do and how we approach this whole dating situation. The moment you realize that the person you're with is not going to be your spouse, you need to sever ties with that individual in that manner. Be very careful. So, God doesn't mess around, and you need to be careful if you're messing around with God's children. He doesn't take it lightly. So I would say stay away from that realm when it comes to kissing, when it comes to anything else, and just have a relationship that is very wholesome. I know a lot of couples that are waiting until they say, I do, before they actually kiss their spouse on that day, the very first kiss in front of everybody, and God will honor that. There's no need to awaken that lust before you should. Don't awaken that love.
And, one thing I noticed, at the end of the ceremony when vows have been made, the pastor says, you may now kiss your bride.
Yeah. In fact, the first wedding I ever officiated was the wedding of a young couple that was attending my church. And they had a courtship relationship, and their first kiss was at the altar.
Yeah. It's a gift, and God has a proper context for his gifts.
Yeah.